Hello and thank you for joining us for today's Feed Your Mind webinar. This series is part of Age Friendly Arizona. We are a network of communities dedicated to connecting older adults with people of all ages. Age Friendly Arizona is supported by partners statewide and beyond, including AARP-AZ, Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust, and grant makers in aging. Please check www.connect60plus.com for news about upcoming webinars and for recorded webinars that have aired previously. Today's webinar will focus on caring for caregivers dealing with ambiguous loss. And we have with us Ann Wheat, Director of Family Caregiving Services at Duet.
Good day, everyone. My name is Ann Wheat, and I serve as Director of Family Caregiver Services for a nonprofit organization located here in Phoenix called Duet, Partners in Health and Aging. I'm very pleased to be with you today to talk about caring for family caregivers, specifically those caregivers who face the highest burdens of care due to a complex grief journey that they face called ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss is something that most people have not heard of, although it is a term that was coined back in the 1970s. And much of my comments today come from the work of the groundbreaking theorist who came up with the theory of ambiguous loss and coined that term, Dr. Pauline Boss. And she wrote a book back in 2011 called Loving Someone Who Has Dementia, How to Find Hope While Coping with Stress and Grief. It's an amazing book for family caregivers who are caring for somebody with dementia, Alzheimer's, or other progressive ongoing conditions that create a prolonged grief and loss journey. Dr. Boss, I want to just cover a little bit about who she is. She is Emeritus Professor at the University of Minnesota. She was a visiting professor at Harvard Medical School and Hunter School of Social Work. And she is best known for her groundbreaking research as pioneer theorist and clinical practitioner of stress reduction for people whose loved ones are ambiguously lost. I will be talking a bit more about ambiguous loss, quite a bit more detail on that. I do want to call your attention to the book that she wrote. She has written a number of academic texts, but once she retired, it was very important to her to create a book specifically for family caregivers that would be very accessible and would bring not only an understanding of their little understood and complex grief journey and how that can impact their health and well-being, but also then share with them techniques, resiliency-based techniques, to be able to better navigate the journey and make it to the end with their own health and wellness intact. So before I really launch into talking further about ambiguous loss, I wanted to kind of set the stage on the situation of family caregiving nationally and within Arizona for these particular high-risk caregivers who are caring for somebody with Alzheimer's or related dementia or other condition that creates ambiguous loss for them. And throughout this, I'll probably refer quite a bit to Alzheimer's or related dementia, but that doesn't mean that there aren't many other caregivers who fall under that umbrella and definitely experience the impacts of ambiguous loss. Currently, we have an estimated 5 million people with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia living in the United States. Because of the rapidly aging population, we are going to see just a tremendous escalation that we all need to be preparing for. So today, 5 million people with Alzheimer's. By 2050, it's estimated that that number will more than triple to 16 million people. So the cost for all of this, for caring for people with Alzheimer's in 2017, was estimated to be $175 billion. But let's take a look at what the estimates are by 2050. The estimated cost is, as long as Alzheimer's and dementia is unchecked, and currently there is no cure, no way to slow it down, no way to really stop it once it gets going. By 2050, the cost is going to be an estimated $1.1 trillion. I heard at a National Alzheimer's Summit recently that rivals or surpasses the entire military budget. I think that is a staggering number, and certainly it is not sustainable. So it's in everyone's best interest to try to support not only the people with the disease, but those who are caring for them, who are doing the heavy lifting of caring for them. On average, every person with dementia will have 2 family caregivers or friends who are stepping up to the plate and providing this care without any pay. That's who we mean by family caregivers. A little bit about the statistics on these family caregivers. It is certainly clear that caregiving can be dangerous to one's health. One statistic I often share, and you'll hear it mentioned from a study on caregivers of persons with Alzheimer's disease, is that at any given age, a person caring for someone with Alzheimer's or related dementia has a 63% higher likelihood of dying than anyone else their age in our country not caring for a person with dementia. So just the very act of them stepping up to the plate and taking on this incredibly hard work really does put their lives at risk. Unsupported, the stress and isolation of this experience can severely impact their health. But that doesn't have to be the outcome. The good news is that there are resiliency-based strategies, there are resources, and there are supports, and many of them available in our community through Duet and other nonprofit organizations throughout Maricopa County that can really help them to be equipped to better navigate this journey and to not do it feeling unsupported and not do it in isolation. I want to read a quote that actually came from Dr. Boss on what professionals and society needs to know. Caregivers need the people in their life, work colleagues, healthcare professionals, faith community members, family and friends, to be more understanding of the sheer complexity of their daily existence. Their journey of trying to do the right thing in an untenable situation is long and hard, and it requires more acknowledgement and community support for caregivers to come through it with their health and well-being intact. A couple of other bits of information I want to pass on to you regarding Arizona. I did want to touch on the numbers in Arizona. We have an estimated 170,000 people with Alzheimer's or related dementia living in Arizona. Arizona is one of the highest risk states because of our aging population, and now Alzheimer's is credited with being the 4th leading killer of people within our state. That's a real tragedy right there. The 170,000 people with Alzheimer's have an estimated 400,000 family and friends providing their care. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about this term ambiguous loss. For those of you who have been in your own caregiving situations, perhaps you have cared for someone with dementia, the term itself may really resonate with you. And for caregivers, I could tell you there is this real aha moment when it is explained to them and they understand for the first time what is going on with them, that they're just not going crazy, that there really is a reason why they feel what they feel and why they are sad so much of the time. I mentioned that it was a term coined by Dr. Pauline Boss in the 70s, and it describes the complicated grief experience of family members caring for persons with Alzheimer's disease and these related conditions that I mentioned. The problem is it isn't really understood by society or by caregivers, and that really complicates things for the caregivers. So when we look at what ambiguous loss means to a person caring for someone with dementia, it is that that person is physically present but psychologically absent or missing. It's a loss that's unclear, so it can't be fixed. It has no closure. And it occurs throughout the caregiving journey. So if we stop and think about the experience of a family member, they notice something's wrong with a person. Maybe it's their spouse. They're becoming more forgetful. They're not able to grasp words. Finally, it gets to the point they can't deny it anymore. They take them to a doctor, and they get the diagnosis of dementia. The world kind of crashes down on their heads. It's a terrible diagnosis to get because they know that it can't be cured. So any sense of control or power over the situation, or hope even, tends to kind of fly away out the window. They continue to feel these significant losses throughout the journey. So if you think about it, as that disease progresses, one day their person can no longer hold a job, so they come home. They want to fight to be able to drive, and eventually it becomes clear they can no longer safely drive a car, and you have to take the keys away. You pick up all of the tasks that they were responsible for in the running of your household, in managing the finances. And your finances are quickly, as it progresses, start slipping right out the door to provide care for them. And these are unacknowledged, major, profound losses, because our society sees grief in a very singular way. And our supports kick in when that person dies. That's when our faith communities really understand to kick in. Our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues, we get the support that doesn't occur as these profound losses are going on. Consequently, that loss pileup, that grief pileup, causes a stress pileup. And we now know from research that it isn't taking on all the extra heavy workload that really can undermine the health and well-being of these caregivers. It is that stress pileup that goes unacknowledged or supported. So I say all this because I think just for all of us out there, I think this really becomes a community responsibility. And just having an understanding of ambiguous loss can change everything in how we interact with these folks and how we assume some responsibility in helping them to find their way to the resources that they need. One shocking statistic is that it takes caregivers on average 3 years to find their way to asking for help. By that time, when I see them come into support groups, their health is generally severely compromised. And the other thing that's important to know is that most caregivers don't self-identify as a family caregiver. It's very important that they learn that term and that they self-identify, because the studies show that once they do self-identify as a family caregiver, they're upwards of 80 to 90% more likely to reach out for the support services that they need. So it's incumbent on all of us to help them to understand that and connect with the services, which are very, very good and out there in our community. So as I mentioned, ambiguous loss is the most difficult type of loss. So unlike death, there is this ongoing pain and it has no closure. It requires some very complex thinking of caregivers to grasp their type of grief and to master the techniques to help them navigate it. They really have to master what's called paradoxical thinking, which means that they drop what in our culture is pretty common, which is that either-or type of thinking. They have to embrace both and thinking, where opposites can both be true. My loved one is still with me, and yet much of what made him who he was is gone, and is gone forever. Those are really opposites, and they have to be able to embrace the ambiguity to move through it. So I touched briefly on how ambiguous loss differs from ordinary loss. Ordinary loss, again, is far less complex. It is difficult. No one is denying that it's very, very difficult to work through the grief of when someone dies. But I like to quote one of our family caregivers who has been caregiver for his wife, mostly in isolation without support until the in stages. And he was talking with his brother, whose wife suddenly died unexpectedly, very quickly. And his brother said, this gentleman who cared for a wife with dementia, she had died recently, but it had been after many, many years of care. His brother said to him, I feel like I fell off a 90-story building. And our caregiver said, I feel like I fell off a 90-story building, one floor at a time. That, to me, is the best description of ambiguous loss and how it impacts a caregiver's life. Let's talk a little bit about what caregivers lose. It's not just losing that loved one as he or she was. You lose certainty about the future. You had all these plans and dreams. You worked very hard. You got your kids through school, if it's spouses, and then suddenly the whole future looks very different. You are losing your own identity. You've lost free time. You lose those relationships and social connections that sustain you, the things that brought you joy. You slowly sacrifice them over time. Sleep becomes a very difficult thing to get. So you lose the control that you formerly had over your life, and you lose your dreams and hope for a good future. Caregivers also lose their identity. Their identity becomes caring for another person. It becomes a very singular focus in a complex caregiving situation. And they struggle with, who am I now? Am I still a spouse? Am I still a son or a daughter? And that loss of identity really is very, very painful. And also you lose any sense of freedom and spontaneity. So we'll talk a little bit about stress, coping, and resiliency. I think it's very important for me to put emphasis on the fact that there is hope. There are things that we can teach caregivers, things that can be done to help them to come through this journey healthy and well, and having a sense of hope and regaining a sense of meaning in their lives, and even reclaiming a sense of having a future that they can look forward to. So how does ambiguity create stress? First, it immobilizes the caregiver in their relationships. It confuses their decision-making. No decisions are clear anymore, and that person who they often relied on can no longer help them make decisions. They are now having to make very hard decisions for two people. It freezes their grief, and it blocks their coping strategies and their ability to cope. We also see a lot of family stress that surfaces. I hear in support groups all the time from caregivers whose family members are not only just absent and won't step in and help, but create a lot of stress and conflict. And this can really be a really big heartbreak for them and a big challenge, and it causes tremendous rifts that sometimes are never healed. It causes a cancellation of families' traditional rituals and celebrations, which is very key to sustaining a sense of family and a sense of grounding in relationships that matter to us. Consequently, these high-burden caregivers experience a deep, ongoing sadness, sometimes depression. They have anxiety, guilt, and shame, and guilt is their constant companion, and they tend to let it oftentimes sort of overwhelm them rather than normalize it and just know that that's just part of every caregiver's journey and just put it to the side and know it's just going to be there. They ignore their self-care. Oftentimes these are folks who never get to the doctor. They quit going to doctor's appointments because they have to cancel them just because they're too busy trying to run their person to all of their appointments and those kinds of things. And they have a high level of stress-related illness. Substance abuse can be a problem. And the other thing that we should all recognize is that when these caregivers are feeling this high level of stress, they are not really able to do as good of a job of caring for their person, who feeds off of their emotional state. And so oftentimes this can lead, or hopefully not too often, but in extreme levels, it certainly can lead to possible abuse of the loved one, who is a very vulnerable person. And so it's really incumbent on us to make sure that they get the support, the caregivers get the support, and are equipped with the tools that they need. Dr. Boss really talks a lot about the difference between sadness and depression. For the most part, when a family caregiver who is experiencing ambiguous loss, which causes these ongoing deep sadnesses, if they are profoundly sad and they go see a medical doctor to talk about it, it is pathologized. They are diagnosed with depression and typically given medication or sent for psychotherapy or family therapy. Dr. Boss argues that what they have is ongoing sadness. It may look a lot the same, but they are still able to function. They don't meet the clinical definition of depression, and that therefore the good news is that they have resilience, and it opens up the possibility that if we just equip them with the tools they need, that they, with good self-care and with resilient techniques, they can navigate their journey. And when caregivers learn this concept from Dr. Boss, it takes a huge burden off their shoulders. They feel a lightness of not feeling guilty, not feeling terrible, and thinking, okay, I have good reason to just be sad all the time, and it gives them great hope to just know that there are things that they could do about it. It is not to say that many caregivers don't have depression. We talk a lot about that as well, to make sure that they understand that when their sadness runs so deep that they can no longer care for themselves, don't want to get out of bed, that then there really is, it is time for intervention with professional help and perhaps some medication. One of Dr. Boss's other teachings is about the myth of closure. In our society, we're a culture that loves closure. And back in the days when we thought about grief through the stages of grief of Kubler-Ross, it made sense for a lot of folks, because if you just did these things 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you reached the end and there was closure and you were over it, over and done. Well, Dr. Boss contends that closure is a myth. There really is no such thing as closure, and that we don't need to get over it or feel guilty when we can't get over it. And that, in fact, our person, even after death, is still with us, and we have them in our stories and our memories. They are still with us, and that is a point of great hope. And so I wanted to bring that up. It also changes the goal for caregivers to one of resilience, not closure. To live well without closure, as Dr. Boss said, requires this both and thinking. And it is helpful for folks to be able to wrap their head around that, to hear some examples. So I've given some here. For instance, she is both gone and still here, versus she's no longer knows my name, so she is dead to me. Those are very different statements. I can take care of both him and myself, versus I can only take care of this person with the disease. I am both a caregiver and a person with my own needs. I have both the anxiety of no closure and the opportunity to move forward with new relationships and interests. I am both sad about my lost hopes and dreams and hopeful about some new hopes and dreams. I hope you can see how that shift in thinking, that important shift for caregivers and how they really view their world, can make all the difference in them then knowing how to move forward and believing that they can move forward and reclaim the meaning and hope in their lives that has vanished. So Dr. Boss teaches a number of techniques, and I do want to touch on those before we close today. The things that she feels are the strategies that a caregiver needs to master in order to navigate this journey well. And I'm going to take a pause at this moment to just say that because at the end I will be touching on this a little bit more, and I want to make sure that you have information on the resources that are out there to help family caregivers with this. It's one thing we found to just read a book, but like any radically new way of thinking, any new skill set, it really requires practice and a diligence to master it and bring it into our lives. And so after Duet's work through our support groups, working with caregivers in book club settings, going through Dr. Boss's book, Loving Someone Who Has Dementia, we saw what a profound impact that had, positive impact on these caregivers, and heard them say things like, between the support group and this Dr. Boss's teachings, it has saved my life. We've heard that many, many times. So we decided to try to do something about that and fill in a void that exists in the toolkit for family caregivers. There are many, many good programs out there that teach them lots of good techniques, but we felt this was one that was really missing. So we applied for funding and were awarded a 3-year investment from the Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust to create a program based on Dr. Boss's work called Finding Meaning and Hope. It's a caregiver video discussion series. We were able to work with professional videographers and bring Dr. Boss to Phoenix and filmed her in small group settings with family caregivers to share chapter by chapter her lessons from her book, Loving Someone Who Has Dementia. We then created a facilitator guide, had an instructional designer working with us on that, and now we launched it in 2018. And so this is a new resource available to anyone. It is for caregivers who will attend 10 weekly sessions, an hour and a half each, and discuss these things and really bring it back home and deepen it to a level where it can have real traction with them. We provide it free of charge to all family caregivers. That's a requirement for anyone to run the program. We train facilitators free of charge and equip them with the videos and all the materials free of charge for anyone who would like to become a facilitator and bring this to their work environment, to a residential senior living facility, to the workplace, whatever would be a place where caregivers might gather. So at the end you'll see some contact information, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that there is an exciting new program. It is taken off really well. We're very hopeful that it will continue to grow not only throughout Maricopa County but throughout the state and beyond. And so look forward to hearing from you back about that. Dr. Boss talks a bit about creating a psychological family. If our own families are not supportive, or if they live so far away that they can't be a help to us, it is very important for family caregivers to have a psychological family of people of your heart and mind who become like your family, who have your back, who you know you could talk to about what's really going on. So, does a community offer spiritual support? Do these caregivers have opportunities for recreation and respite? Is there support in their workplace? Or are they afraid to even say that they are caring for someone because they think that it will affect job promotion? Do they have the information and resources that they need? Do they have access to that? So these are all things that are part of creating that circle of support for each person. Again, just to touch on this again, family rituals, celebrations, and gatherings often go by the wayside. Dr. Boss teaches how to modify them but keep them, that they are so important to our family and our sense of family that we should not just cast them aside. And there are many ways that they can be modified to still work for the family caregiver and the person with dementia and the rest of the family members. And then finally, Dr. Boss has developed 7 guidelines for caregiver resiliency and hope. And so through this video discussion series, these are also taught and discussed. First, find meaning. Balance control with acceptance. Broaden your identity. Manage your mixed emotions. Hold on and let go. imagine new hopes and dreams, and take the time to mind yourself. And I will very quickly touch on each of these, and you'll have it on the screen to reference. So in finding meaning, find a way to make sense out of your loss. One of the things caregivers lose is a sense of meaning in life. What does it mean anymore? What is my purpose? What is happening to us? Why did this happen? And so giving the problem a name, ambiguous loss, and reconnecting with meaning in life is critical. Balancing control with acceptance. Caregivers oftentimes try to hold on tight to control, and they have to really learn to master letting go of that, and also recognizing that the good enough relationship may be what they aspire to, and that if they can wrap their heads around that and just let go of the idea that they're ever going to have that relationship like it was, but that there still can be good things in it, if they just accept good enough, that's a good step toward healing. Beginning to broaden their identity again. As I said, their identity really, really narrows. They even start to question, am I still a spouse? What's my role in this family? Who am I now? I've given up all those things I love. And they really need to start fighting for themselves and get some of these things that gave them joy, that gave them meaning, back into their lives. It's very important that as they manage their very mixed emotions, that they learn to understand that anger is normal, guilt is normal. These are not just anomalies that they feel. These are things that every caregiver feels. Going to support groups really can be so helpful to them. So if they see those things as being normal, they tend to not allow them then to take power over their lives. And interestingly, as they go to support groups, and you're in a support group where people have all read Dr. Boss's works, they really start to hold each other accountable to these things, and make sure that everybody keeps kind of coming back to, okay, remember, everybody feels guilt, everybody feels anger. Good, you said it out loud. Now let's just set it aside and normalize it and try to work on getting back to a better place. Holding on and letting go. So you have to let go of this person who was, that is no longer there for you and will not be back. And so recognizing that they are both here and gone, and grieving what you have lost, and even doing that in the company of other people with a little ritual really helps them. Grieving a loss, mourning a loss, ritualizing a loss cannot be done alone. And so when others will step in and be there for them to have a ritual about that loss, it really kind of makes all the difference in helping them to move through it and not just adding it to the stress pileup. As people are coming through and nearing end stages, they could get caught off guard and just fall over this finish line of sorts when their person dies, with completely spent and with no idea of what life will mean afterwards. So they really must start to think about new hopes and dreams and be able to project ahead and say, you know what, I will have a life. Life will go on for me. And there will be things that will bring me joy. There will be family members, grandchildren, friends, happiness, activities, health, that I get to reconnect to that brought me great joy, and they will again. And finally, taking the time to mind yourself. We discussed how caregivers forget to go to their doctors. They don't make time for that. They take such good care of the other, but not themselves. And this is a lesson for all of them, a reminder that they really must not do that. It cannot serve any of us well when the caregiver becomes the invisible second casualty of a terrible disease. It happens all too often, and it doesn't have to happen. And so really learning these techniques I cannot emphasize enough how much it can help them to carve out some time without guilt to pay attention to themselves as well. We don't need to be losing these wonderful people who step up to the plate to care. We don't need to be losing them early as well. Accepting the good enough relationship is hard, but it can be really life-changing for them, really transformative for them when they finally let go of what was and accept what is. And even that is a changing dynamic. but embracing the less than perfect, realizing that things will not just stay the same, can make all the difference. Duet, my organization, has help available, and I've listed some ways that we help. Again, here is some more information on the Finding Meaning and Hope program. And then I will end by showing how you get a hold of us through our website. All of our support groups, all of our other programs are listed there. You can call one number and you will get somebody. You can ask for me if you want to know about caregiver services. If I'm not available, a member of my team hopefully will be able to help you. We run caregiver support groups all across the Valley. We have a caregiver-to-caregiver mentor program. We offer personalized guidance by phone for many, many hundreds of caregivers. Of course, the video series, and then our annual caregiver symposium and workshops through the year to help give you techniques. I want to also emphasize Duet is one of many support organizations. And so if we are not the organization to be able to provide the help you need, we work very closely with these other agencies to pass the baton carefully and make sure you are connected to get the support that you need or that your person needs, your caregiver, your colleague, your worker, whoever that may be, that you can help guide them to one number, and we will take care of getting them connected to the resources and support they need. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here with you.